Welcome. Thanks for coming this afternoon. My name is Matt Milner. I'm a consultant and an instructor for Pluralsight. We do online developer training covering all of Microsoft, as well as now branching out to all sorts of other technologies. We've got new courses on RavenDB and SVN and all sorts of great stuff. But today I'm going to be talking to you about Windows Workflow 4.5. The version that will ship with the next release of the .NET Framework and the tooling coming in Visual Studio 11. My focus when I do consulting and instructing has primarily been connected systems, so WCF and web services, workflow, BizTalk. So I've been using workflow since it first came out, and I was using it back when it was just in BizTalk, and they wanted to make something lightweight. So I'm pretty excited about Workflow 4, but also looking forward to a lot of the things coming in Workflow 4.5. Out of curiosity, how many people have used Windows Workflow Foundation before? A fair number. Okay. How many have used version 4 of Windows Workflow? Some of you? Okay. All right. Well, this will be interesting then as we're doing 4 or 5. So feel free to ask those questions about what came in between. 4.5 is really a revision that entails a lot of refinement, a lot of customer feedback, a lot of features that didn't make the cut for .NET 4. Windows Workflow version 4, for those of you who don't know, was pretty much a rewrite of Windows Workflow Foundation. So it shipped in .NET 3 along with WCF and WPF. In .NET 3.5, it got some updates, some enhanced integration with WCF. But in .NET 4, they really kind of stepped back and took a hard look at performance, both at runtime and design time. They took a look at the programming model. And they really didn't start from scratch conceptually, but they started from scratch in terms of the code and rebuilt Windows Workflow. And so those of you who kind of raised your hands that, yes, you've worked with it before, and you haven't worked with Workflow 4, you're missing out. It's much better than Workflow 3, and Workflow 4.5 promises to be even better. So we're going to take a look at some of the new features. We're going to take a look at some of those features that you probably thought should have been there in version 1. We'll take a look at some things that are pretty huge in terms of things like workflow versioning, and other things that are smaller refinements but can make a big difference as you're building your workflows and your activities. So, the word "this" is important if you're a C# developer. How many of you are doing VB development? We got 4, maybe 5 hands, okay? You wouldn't have minded Workflow version 4 then, because all the expressions that you could enter into the designer were in Visual Basic. If you were a C# developer, it was sometimes frustrating to start up a new C# project and then go in and have to start writing VB. If you're like me, you caught yourself using null instead of nothing and all sorts of other good things. So one of the things that they've added for version 4.5 is C# expression support. We'll create a new application to show some of this off here. So I'm just going to create a new workflow app. I am going to use the console app because it is a demo, but most of the time you won't. And let's go ahead and drop a flowchart activity out there. Now the flowchart, again, was new in Workflow version 4. So for those of you who haven't worked with version 4, this was a new kind of activity that could be used at the root level, but really could be used anywhere within your workflow. And it has the basic notions of decisions and switches and the kinds of things you'd expect with flow. So I'm going to go on to this decision, and we'll notice down here a couple things. I'm going to bring up some arguments. So I'm going to create this workflow, and I'm going to have passed into it an argument. We'll call it names. And for this, I'm going to browse and do a list. Oops. Come on. There we go. A list of strings that will get passed in. And so you can already see that for the default value over here, it says enter a C# expression. Right from the start with the arguments, we see that. As I go to the decision over here, I have the same thing for the condition. And we could do something like names that is not equal null. Right? That's C#. Right? It's not nothing. We're using null, we're using null, we're using the not equal sign. But that's not very interesting. It is C#, but it's not very interesting C#. So let's do something a little more interesting. From n in names where n dot length is greater than 3, select n. We'll do a first or default. That does not equal null. So we've got not just the ability to put in here those simple expressions, but we have full support for language integrated query, right, the link, and other things that you'd come to expect within your workflows. Now I've got to connect this up. I'm going to make this the start node, so my designer will be happy there. Now, one of the things that this kind of introduces is I have a different workflow project here. I started this in workflow version 4. That means I have a bunch of expressions in my C# project that are VB. So thankfully, when I opened this up in Visual Studio 11, it retained that setting. It kept the fact that these were going to be VB expressions. And so if I go in and even just add anything in here, even though it's a C# project and I add it in, it's still a VB expression. Right? So you're not going to have to, as you take that existing application and migrate it or pull it up into VS11, you're not going to have to go rewrite all those VB expressions as C#. You may want to, but you don't have to go and rewrite those things to get it to work. So thankfully, they thought of that. So, a small change. Right? Not a lot to show, but for many people, a pretty big change and one that they're happy with, being able to now write C#. There are a ton of small changes in terms of activity authoring, right? The design experience and working in the editor in Visual Studio, as well as the editor when you rehost it. Some of these enhancements are just about making it easier for you to create that workflow, easier to build the activity hierarchy, to connect things together. Some of them are about navigating those larger workflows. As you start getting 50 to 100 nodes and activities in your workflow, it can be kind of hard to find your way around, especially as some of the activity designers tend to collapse themselves down and you have to double-click to get into them. It's hard to get a look and feel for what's going on in my workflow. So we'll look at some changes that make it easier for you to find things, that make it easier for you to navigate around the workflow, and to make it easier for you to describe the workflow and document it so that people looking at it can make more sense. We've got some new activities and other new features that we'll take a look at here. So rather than spend a lot of time in PowerPoint, we'll actually look at those features. So one of the things I had to do with this decision, you'll remember, is I had to connect it up to the start. Now I had a nice little shortcut here. I could right-click and set it as the start node. Otherwise, in the flowchart, I have to find this little handle and drag it down and connect it down there. Well, one of the things they've added now is the ability for me to take an activity, and notice when I come over and hover near that activity, I get these little arrows, one on each side, that I can drop that activity onto. So if I drop it on there, right, it automatically gets connected. I no longer have to worry about connecting these things up. It's one less thing for me to do. And if you're like me, I'll get a crowded workflow, especially a flowchart, and I won't even notice that things aren't connected. There'll be lines missing. I forgot to connect things together, which really gets fun when you're building a workflow service. Now, you can certainly drag these around. You're not tied to the layout it gives you. You can move these around and set them up however you want. So that's one thing. We can auto-connect. The other thing is, now that I have this connected, if I decide I want another step in here, I don't have to disconnect and reconnect everything. I can simply drag right onto the line. and drop it in, and it automatically hooks that up for me. So it allows me to drop these things in the existing chain, hooks everything up for me, and puts those things together. So we'll just put some text in there. So in this case, it was the true. In this case, we'll say this was a false. So we're going to check that input argument. Now let's go create an activity that we can use in here. So go to workflow. I'll just add a regular activity. A declarative activity. And in this one, I'm going to put a try catch in here. So that's going to be my root activity. And what I want to do with this activity is allow somebody to come in, pass in some arguments, and execute this, and do it in a try catch. And so I'm making my activity safe, right, by catching that exception. But I also want to be able to somehow let them know about the exception. Right? I don't want to throw it back to them, but I want to be able to let them know that an exception happened, and to give them the ability to react to that, the ability to get some information from the exception and do something. So if I were writing this in code, what I would want is some sort of a delegate. I want some sort of a callback where I could say to the calling code, hey, this event is fired, right, or this action happened. You gave me a delegate. I'm going to invoke it, and I'm going to pass it some arguments. Now, Workflow 4 has had these delegates all along, but they weren't enabled, they weren't surfaced readily through the designer. So you couldn't really, you couldn't do this very easily. So let's build this out. So I'm going to come in here and use my favorite right line activity. So we're trying to execute here. Now, I have this right line, and as I commonly do, I've decided that I actually need more steps there. I need to do more in the try than just a right line. So for those of you who have done Workflow 4 before, how would I do that? I need to actually have 2 or 3 activities in here. Right now I have a right line. What would I have to do? I hear voices. In Workflow 4, I'd have to delete or cut this right line. Right, take this and go cut, and now go find a sequence and drag it in there and paste it back in and then add things. Right? Well, I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to take another activity, and when I drag it over, if you look above and below the right line, you'll see those gray bars. If I drag onto one of those, notice that it automatically wraps it with a sequence. Right? It can tell, the designer can tell that I'm in an activity that only allows a single child activity. The try block only allows me to have one activity in there. And I'm trying to add another activity to it. Rather than blocking me and making me go through all those motions, it says, well, clearly what you want to do is have more than one activity in here. And the easiest way to do that is to wrap them with a sequence. So it puts the sequence in, adds my activity at the start before the one that was existing there. And then I can drag these things and do it whatever I want. Now, this activity I added is called a no persist scope. This is a new activity in Workflow 4.5. Again, you had the same abilities in Workflow 4, but they weren't surfaced up in a very ready fashion. You didn't have an activity for this. You had to write your own activity to do it. And what the no persist scope allows you to do is section off a block of your workflow and say, for this period of my workflow, for all these steps, I want to guarantee that you're not going to persist my state out to the database. You're not going to try and save my state. So I may have things in there that I've got, some variables. If we look at the persist scope, I can create a variable in that, in this try catch or in this sequence here. right? And I may want to initialize it in the persist scope and then clear it up. I don't want it to persist and make that round trip to the database. So I have some control now over that functionality. All right. So we have our try. It has an error here because it's expecting a catch of some sort. So let's go add a new catch. We'll do the good old-fashioned divide by 0. That never happens to you guys, does it? Divide by 0. So what do I want to do if a divide by 0 happens? Right? So if in the course of running this activity, I get a divide by 0 in here, what do I want to do? Well, this is where I want to handle the exception, but I actually want to let the calling code know what went wrong here. So let's set this up. Let's go to our arguments for the try catch. So one thing I'm going to pass in is my divisor. We'll blame the calling code for the divide by 0 here. But the other thing I want to pass in is, I'll call this the exception action. And rather than an in or an out, I'm going to make it a property. All right, so this is going to be a property on my activity that you can set. I'm going to go look for activity action, and you'll see that there are about 16 or so of these activity action signatures. Just like in the .NET Framework, there's an action delegate signature, and there are about 16 variations of that. So this just describes an action, right, with a certain number of typed arguments. So a delegate that takes n number of arguments. So in this case, it's got one argument. If I come down here, I've got 2 arguments, and I can type each of those. So I want to say it's an action of string. Essentially saying that somebody's going to provide me with a callback or a delegate that has a signature that it takes in one parameter, and that parameter is a string. So in our try here, let's go, we'll cause our divide by 0 if they pass in 0. So we'll add that in. So here we've got our variable that we created earlier. We'll rename that. Temp result, we'll make that an int. So we'll say temp result equals 15 divided by divisor. So if we pass in 0, we're definitely going to get that exception. We get in here, we catch the exception now, and this is where we get into the ability that they've added in. So we have this new activity over here called invoke delegate. I want to, in the course of my activity, go out and invoke or call some delegate or one of these activity actions that you've created for me. And if I do the drop down, it finds that property defined of the exception action. But I also need to pass the parameters. I need to kind of map up that delegate takes a string. What string am I going to pass it? Well, I have an exception up here called exception. So I'm going to go down to the arguments. They're all defined because it knows the signature. So I can take exception.message and pass that back out. So we're setting up our delegate here. That's the main thing, but we saw auto add or auto wrap with a sequence in those cases where you can only have a single activity. We've got the new no persist scope activity. So we're going to identify parts of our workflow where the state will not be saved until at least after that activity. And then we've added in our invoke delegate activity down here to go and call this delegate. So the other side of that, if we come back to our workflow then, is we should be able to build, and we should see our activity show up in the toolbar, or the toolbox, I should say. So there's our sample activity. So let's drag that down here. Now, the sample activity has, over here in the properties, the divisor property, So that's where I'll put my 0 in order to really mess it up and throw that exception. And it has the exception action. Now I'm not going to set it in the property grid. I'm just going to double click. And here you can see there's my activity. And this is also new, that the designer recognizes that there's a property of type activity action. Right? Recognizes that that activity has some sort of delegate being passed in. So the designer automatically gives you the capability of specifying that delegate. Again, we'll keep it kind of simple here, and I'll pass this in. Notice that when I drag it in now, I have the activity, but it also added that section right above it where it gave me the named argument. And I can change that name if I want to. But essentially, whatever I put here, whatever I name this argument, is what I'll then use in my expression. So we'll say error from sample activity. And then we can do message, which is our string coming back out. And you got to love this. This is the developer preview part, I'm hoping. Oh, it actually worked. I was doing this earlier, and I stretched the text box, and everything stretched except for the actual text box. So I had all this extra gray, and then the white part, the actual part I cared about, stayed the same. So clearly that was just a glitch with the preview. So we've got this delegate now where we can invoke this activity, and it can call us back, and it can provide us information. It can pass us details here as well. Let's go ahead and build that. To run it, we got a build succeeded. Does anybody have a problem with my build succeeding right now? You look at my workflow. Yeah, the question was, how am I actually going to get to that sample activity? This is my problem that I continually have of I didn't connect it to anything. And unfortunately, nothing warned me. Nothing told me that it wasn't connected. I had to see it or have somebody see it for me. So there was no way for me to know that. Well, thankfully, in version 4.5, we have this nice little property on the flow chart where we can just check this box and say, help me out here. Right? Validate for me unconnected nodes. Right? If I have nodes on the design surface that aren't connected, that should cause a validation warning. So we can see now we've got up here at the top right, all nodes must be connected when validate unconnected nodes is set to true. Right? So now it's invalid, and I get some indication. But more than that, if I build, right down here, you can see build failed. Right? For anybody that used workflow version 4, you may have come across the fact that even though your workflow failed validation, your project would still build successfully. Right? Which might be okay if you're actually in the designer and you can see that big red exclamation mark. But it's not really helpful if that workflow isn't currently open or you're on a build server where nobody's looking at it, hopefully. There's no UI popping up, right? So this notion that an invalid workflow would still allow the build to be successful or for the app to compile was kind of problematic. So we've got these two new things now. One is for the flow chart, we can tell it to validate those unconnected nodes so that we find out that this thing is not connected. And two, for this type of validation error or any other validation error, the build will fail. Right? Your workflow will cause the build of the project to fail. So let's drag this guy up and we'll just auto connect. Right? For me, that's even easier than trying to grab that little handle and connect it, just to drag it up there and auto connect. And I'm going to drag this down a little bit just to make the workflow spread out a bit for the next part. All right, so now we have that in here. So I said our decision is, notice we get a nice little pop-up. Most of it's on the screen. If the length is greater than 3, right, if we find anything with a length greater than 3, we're going to go down the true path, and we will want to go down the false path. So let's go execute this. So the way we pass parameters to a workflow is through a dictionary string object. New list of string. So we'll just do that. So we'll say that we've got, oops. Yeah, that's right. We've got our new dictionary. We're just going to pass in that property, that argument list, names. And here we're going to pass in 2 items with a length of 3. So our condition should be false. We should go down this path over here and we should run our activity. Since we're running that activity and we're passing it 0, it should throw an exception. And in that case, when it throws an exception, we should go into our catch block here. It should call our delegate, or it should call back out to our main workflow, that delegate, which will write out the message and indicate that we had an error. Assuming I built everything correctly. So there's our right line. This is false. There's our right line that we're in the try block trying to execute. And now we got into the catch block. It invoked the delegate back in the main workflow, and it then was able to use that information, that attempted divide by 0, in the main workflow then to do something. All right. Questions about anything so far? All right. Now our workflow is starting to get kind of big here, because I made it that way. But also our sample activity, as I mentioned, is one of those things that has a tendency to be collapsed. So looking at this workflow, I can't even really tell what's in that sample activity. So there are several things that will help us manage these larger workflows and work around these larger workflows. One simple thing, got the little hand down here to do panning. So when you use that tool now, you can just drag the workflow around and move it to wherever you need to so you can find the particular items. So you turn that on, turn that off. Small, but hopefully helpful. The other thing is, finally, we have multi-select in our workflow. So I can select this, and now I can do the control click, and I can move more than one activity around. Again, small thing, but if you had to move 50 activities, it probably doesn't seem very small. So we've got those 2 new things, the pan and the multi-select. You can also, when you're not in pan mode, you can just drag around like you would expect and select as many things as you want. So that helps out a little bit with the navigation and kind of the cleanup there. But I still can't see what's in that activity. And if I had a lot of sequences in here, or if I dropped another activity, the composite like that, I might not be able to see it. So for that, we have this document outline. I'm going to try and, there we go. So the document outline allows you to see the workflow from a different perspective, in a tree view that lets you drill down into these things. So I can see the decision, I can follow the true, and see those items. I can now drill into the sample activity, and notice that when I click on that activity in the tree, or the outline, it takes me right to it in the workflow. So a different way to look at the workflow structure, to be able to find those items that you want based on that tree, instead of trying to see it directly in the designer there, to get a little better view, and then to follow that and use those links to get to the places that you want to. Flowchart's a little bit strange in that the start node is what we really care about, but it also lists all the nodes, which actually may be more confusing than anything else. But it does show you that at the top level of the workflow, right, these are the things that it has, that it considers nodes within the workflow and that are connected up to that. And that will work with not just with flowchart, of course, but with any kind of activity that you have. Let's unpin that. So we have the document outline. That's something you actually used to have in Workflow 3, went away in Workflow 4, and now they've brought it back to help people navigate through those workflows. The other thing is, as we go find, these are things that you would just expect probably worked if you didn't know otherwise. But finding in a workflow wasn't all that good. Now if you do a Control F, a regular find, and you look for something like false, and here we'll just look in the current document. And it found nothing. Let me save that. Do right. All right, now I've really broken it. There we go. Apparently the current document doesn't work, but current project does. So you'll notice that it has the right line here. And if I double click again, it will take me right to that activity. So it's finding me things that are in here. It will look for the activity names or property names, kind of all the things that would be surfaced up through the designer that you would see in there. Now, if I do a control find for state, you can see that when I do that and I do find in files, I'll find things that wouldn't normally show up in the designer itself or surfaced up as a workflow, but it's actually in the files. So you can choose when you do find versus find in files. The find is going to actually use kind of the object model or the model items behind the activities. So you get properties and display names and those sorts of things. The find in files is actually looking over that XAML. So it's going to find things that are kind of buried in there that are designer generated, that maybe are expressions and other things kind of hiding under the covers. All right. So I think we covered all but one thing here. And that is, I often kind of get going too fast and I get an extra argument or a variable. How do I delete that? Well, how would you expect to be able to delete that, I guess, would be a better question. Should I be able to say, computer, delete last argument? Not yet. When the connect gets a little better, I might be able to do that. In version 4, you just had to know to hit the delete key. There's no context menu. There's nothing else that comes up. If you right-click on that, you get nothing. You just had to know, oh, I have an extra one. I have to hit the delete key. Not intuitive at all. All right, so basic things, adding in the ability for you to delete those arguments. Now, the other thing you'll notice when I did that is I have the ability to add an annotation. So this last set of features around the designer is all about how do I make the workflow itself more self-describing? How do I make it more intuitive for somebody who's looking at it? And so annotations are one way we can do that, where on an argument or an activity, I can add an annotation. So I can say this is list of names to be checked. And now I get a nice little icon down there for that. If I mouse over it, I get the tooltip so I can see what that is. So, commenting essentially for your workflows and being able to do that. Right. We could add those to activities. I can annotations, add annotation here. This shows how to use a callback or delegate. And the activities, you'll notice, also have the little Post-it note, and I can mouse over that. But I can also choose annotations and show all annotations. And then they become inline. So you can see right on there, and I can undock it or dock it as well. So those annotations can show up right in line with the designer so that all the code is commented as you go. And then finally, on the flow chart, the decision and the switch now have editable display names. So rather than it always saying decision, we can say any strings with more than 3 characters. So your decision shapes, your switch shapes can actually tell somebody what that thing is doing, right? Especially if you have a business person or an analyst or somebody looking at this who maybe isn't going to have any idea what that link statement is doing. You've got another way to kind of describe, here's what these things are doing. So lots of little changes, some of them really big impact, some of them maybe not so much for you, but really all about making it easier to navigate, making it easier to author, and take advantage of some of those rich features that are in the framework, like the activity actions and activity funcs, those delegates, like the no persist zones, right? Surfacing those up in an easier way through the activities and the designers, as well as a lot of just dropping it on the lines, auto-connecting things, just making it so that your experience authoring the workflows is a lot simpler, but also making it easier to document those things and make sure that your workflow makes sense, both at a user level through the documentation, but also at runtime or build time through the validation and the validation of the workflows. All right. So this next one is one that technically you already have in a couple of different flavors. One is we had a state machine back in Workflow 3. Right? It was one of the main activities that people used. You either had a sequence or a state machine that most people used as their starting point. And we lost that moving to Workflow 4. I just didn't have time to validate the design and some of the other pieces in the time frame. So we lost state machines in .NET 4. However, today already, as of, almost a year ago now, I think, they brought back the state machine activity and made it available. But you had to install this .NET Framework 4 Platform Update 1. First of all, you had to know about it. Then you had to go install it. And it comes in two parts. It comes in the runtime part and then the tools, the designer part for Visual Studio. And while that's great, and the state machine was kind of nice to have back and to be able to have that model again, it meant that your servers also had to have the platform update applied. So you had to make sure that as you go and you build these things, you're targeting a slightly different version of the framework, and you had to make sure that that framework update was applied on the server as well. Right? So those have now just been folded into workflow in .NET 4.5. They give you the ability to model out the state machine. Right? So we have states. We have triggers that define when we might move out of that state. And we have transitions that define the flow from one state to another. Right? How many people have used the state machine activity either in Workflow 3 or have tried it out in the new bits? 2, 3, okay. Let's take a quick look at that. We'll just add one in here quick. So I'm just going to create a new workflow. And now I'll go down to where is it hiding? The state machine section. So you can see I've got state machine, state, and final state. And when you drag one of these on, looks a lot like a flowchart. We've got the variety of states that you can drag on. I'm actually going to make this fairly simple just so you can kind of see the concepts. And then I have this final state over here. Now this works just like the flowchart. I can come up and connect it automatically. But notice instead of just a line, I actually have the transition that defines moving from one state to another. So let's set up a couple of variables here. So we'll have a target number. We'll just do a number guessing game here. Target number, that'll be an int. And we'll have a current guess string. And then we'll do a current guess, and that'll be an int as well. So we've got some variables here to hold these things. What we'll do then is we'll go into state 1, and this is where, when we start the workflow, because of the connections, this is the first thing to go in and execute. And like any good state, it has entry and exit flows in here that we can do. And so I'm going to drag an if activity on here, And in my C# expression, I'll say if the target number equals 0, then I'm going to go and assign that a new value. I'm going to go pick a random number here. So if target number is 0, then target number equals new random. We'll pick a number between 1 and 100 and assign that out. So as we enter this state, we'll generate this random number, and then we're going to allow people to guess as they go through. And so we can see from this particular state, we have the entry and the exit, and we also have this transition over to the final state. So let's go into the transition. So while we're in that state, these transitions define trigger conditions, or essentially events that may happen while we're in that state that could move us to a new state. Now, a trigger condition can really be anything. Right. Let's go out here and do a invoke method. That's what I want. There we go. System.console. And I'm going to invoke the readline method here. And in the properties over here for the result, I'm going to use current guess string, because I'm going to get back a string, obviously, from the read line. So I've now, I'm going to go out, invoke this read line, ask somebody to give me a number, and then we'll test it. Now I've got that in there, but I probably should prompt them first. So I'm going to take advantage of that new wrap with sequence. Put a write line before that. Say, enter your guess. And then we invoke this method, so we'll get that back. And then I'm also going to add an assign in here, because I need to get that into a number. Okay. So current guess equals int.parse, current guess string. So we prompt them, we get that information back out. Now, we've got this trigger over here, which is that sequence. And notice that that's any kind of activity. Right? A trigger in workflow 4 is any activity. And when that activity completes, that trigger is considered to have fired. So a trigger could be something like a delay activity that pauses for a set amount of time. And after that amount of time, the delay activity is going to complete and move on. It could be a WCF receive activity that's waiting for a WCF message. It could be any number of activities, but it can also just be a write line, right? Which obviously won't take very long to execute, which means it will trigger very quickly. So any activity can fall into that trigger, and what that means is, hey, this happened, that means we should go now through this transition. Well, if the current guess equals the target number, then we want to write out, right, you are correct, and we want to go to the final state. Right? But what do we want to do if they guess wrong? Well, we want to have them keep guessing. We essentially, if we go back to our state machine, we have this flow that we can see, but we also want them to, when they're in this guessing state, right? Actually give it a name. When they're in this guessing state, we want them to continue guessing. Right? So we go to the transition. And here you can see we can, down at the very bottom, kind of hiding this add shared trigger transition. This was available in the version, or is available in the version that's out today, but you don't have this little shortcut here. You have to drag the connector of the transition around to get it in just the right place. And again, you have to know to do that. Right? There's no signal to you that you can do this. And so what I want to do is say, well, I have this trigger, this is this event that's going to happen, but that might actually lead to more than one transition. Right? Based on my conditions, I may want to go to different states. So I'm going to add a new transition back to the guessing state. Oops. There we go, transition 2. So we can transition 1 is kind of collapsed here, and we have transition 2. So here, right, we could just say, well, the current guess does not equal the target. And then we can go in and write our logic to notify the user. Right, so we could put an if in there, and we can say, well, if the current guess is less than the target, then we should go higher. All right, otherwise we go lower. So we write that out, and then we go back to that state. So as we look at this transition, you can see we've got a trigger. We've got multiple different transitions where this can go now off of that particular state. And if we go back and look at the state itself, you'll see we have the entry and the exit, and then you also have navigations over to these transitions. So you can readily see what happens in this state as you come in, as you go out, and what are the possible transitions that might occur here. So we'll go comment this out. And we'll start a new game here. We'll see what I missed in there. So enter your guess. We should probably do 50, 75. Eventually we'll get it. There we go. Finally got it. Right. So we continually transition back into that state. We can stay there. Right. As we go back in that state, we reset that trigger. So if it was a delay, we'd wait again. If it was a WCF receive, we'd be ready to receive that message again. Right. In this case, we're back in there waiting for this read line to execute. But the state machine allows us to model out those kinds of workflows in a nice way, and having these shared triggers and the conditions makes it really nice to do rule-based transitions now to other activities. All right. So you can try out state machines today. They haven't changed a lot from the platform update to what's coming in 4.5. The main thing I've found is just that simpler model of using the shared trigger. They surfaced a little better in the designer. So now we get into web services, the WCF services, where our workflow is the definition of the service. So we have what's called a workflow service. Right? Rather than writing a C# or a VB class that implements our service contract and does everything in code, we have a workflow that does all of that. In workflow 4, when you wrote that workflow, you'd use the activities, and the contract, right, the WCF service contract, was just inferred from your workflow. So if you had a receive activity that had a particular operation signature, great, that was part of the contract. And if you had another receive activity in there and it was a different operation, that was part of the contract. Well, lots of people didn't really like that because, one, it was really hard to see what your contract was without looking at WSDL, which isn't necessarily make it easier to see what your contract is. And two, there was no way to take an existing WCF service contract and say, you know what, I have this contract, I want to implement it as a workflow. Or I have this contract, I want to make sure my workflow actually matches that signature. And so we have both of those options now in Workflow 4.5, where you can either start from the .NET interface, your service contract, and generate activities that you can drop into your workflow that match the signatures for all of the operations. Or you can take your workflow and you can simply point it to that contract and say, hey, I'm implementing that contract. And when you do that, you'll get validation at build time and at design time in your workflows telling you are or are not in compliance with that contract. So you can actually see as you build your workflow whether that's working. So I've got a workflow service here that I actually built before I had a service contract. It has a method to submit an expense report, and it has a method for a manager to come in and submit their response. And so the contract was generated from the workflow. I looked at this and it said, oh, you have an operation called Submit Manager Response. I can see the namespace and the service contract name over here in the properties. I can see the parameters you specified. I can build a service contract definition for you. But what I wanted to be able to do is have in my contracts this regular WCF service contract. I wanted to be able to have this so I could use it, I could maybe share it, I could leverage it at design time, build time for clients, whatever it might be. I wanted to have this external from the workflow. And before, I could certainly do this, but there was no guarantee that they would match up. I could go write this interface just like I did here. There was no guarantee that these things would match up. And so what Workflow 4 allows us to do then is come to our workflow, and down here in the properties we have this implemented contracts. And I've already got a reference to that project because it has some other types in it I'm using. So if I go browse to contracts, I can pick that. I hit OK, and everything looks good. If I come up and change this, notice that right away I get an error message saying, hey, the operation submit report does not exist in the contract with this name and this namespace. Right? By saying I implement that contract, it validates now against those activities that the signatures match, that all the operations are included in my workflow and being carried out. So I've got assurances that if this is validating, that it's been tested against that contract, and I know that I'm in compliance with that service contract. Now, the other option is that I can come down to my item here, and I have this new context menu item to import a service contract. Because I'm not really adding a service reference. I'm not doing regular WCF stuff. What I really want to do is take that contract, import it into my application, and get the definitions for those operations. I want to get activities generated. So I use the same dialog to go and browse for that thing. And it'll prompt me in a second here. Hopefully. So it says importing service contract at the bottom. Clearly it's taking a little while. There we go. It's letting me know that it completed. Once you build, you'll actually see in your toolbox, you'll see activities that you can use. So I'll build that. Uh-oh. Assembly system.xaml cannot be resolved. All right. So it's not adding all the references correctly. So we'll go add a reference to system.xaml. I know, this is the most exciting part, right? The new add reference dialog box. That's not a workflow thing. Now we'll see if we can build this. Project that is being built, which I did. Well, this is new. We'll try one more rebuild here, and it's still cleaning my project. We'll try this one more time and see if we get that. I've not seen this one pop up before. It's a great part about using developer previews, isn't it? All right, it's not going to play nice. Let me show you what it's generated in here. Just so you can kind of see. I don't need the designer. It didn't actually generate a typed class. It's generating a class that's an activity template factory. Right? If you've ever noticed when you drag a receive shape or certain shapes, certain activities from the toolbox, you actually get more than one item. You get, for the receive shape, for example, or the receive and send reply, you get a sequence, and then a receive and a send reply. Well, that's a template factory, right? It's something that when you drag it from the toolbox, code gets invoked to build up a hierarchy of activities. And so that's what they build you here, so that if this would compile and build, what we'd see is we get a new item in the toolbox, and when we dragged it onto the designer, oops. Now it's just completely messing with me. It's switching instances of Visual Studio. What we would see is exactly what we got here. We'd have a sequence with a receive and a send reply, and they'd already be pre-configured with the operation name and the contract and everything else that we need for that particular operation. So it just makes it easier for you. You don't have to configure them by hand. But when you drop them in, you still get the same end result. And you still have full control to go in and edit those things and change them as you need to, keeping in mind then that it probably wouldn't match your service contract if you make changes to the operation name or other parts of the signature. But changing some of the other properties around how it behaves within the workflow would certainly be okay. I'm going to let that spin for a second while it thinks. So we have the external contract. From that, you can either just validate your workflow against it, or you can generate these activity template factories that will allow you to drag on the appropriate WCF activities that are already pre-configured to match that contract. So you'd have all those things for each operation on the contract. You'd have an item in the toolbox that you could drag on. All right, the last two things I want to show you are pretty big. One is workflow versioning. If you've done any workflow at all, this is one of those ones that you probably wanted and thought should have been there in version 1. Right? We haven't had this ability to create a workflow, start it, have it running, and then go out and change the definition to run new instances. Because what would happen is, in the old Workflow 3 versions, things just blew up. Right? You'd go to kind of reload your workflow definition, and the type that you were trying to load didn't match the type that you now had, and all the serialization was just broken. And all those workflows that you'd started before you made changes didn't work. Now in Workflow 4, we had a much better ability to do everything in just XAML. Right? I could just stave everything as XML and load it. There was no compilation required, so it got a little bit easier. But still, if you change things such as adding a variable to a particular scope when it was persisted, and you brought it back up, it would explode. Right? It would everything would stop working. And so with workflow versioning in .NET 4.5, you have the ability to, on a given workflow definition, specify what's called a workflow identity. This is where we can give it a name, we can give it a version number, and that gets stamped into the XAML and is part of the workflow definition. Then we can create a new definition of that workflow, and we can give it a new version number, and we can now have these XAML files of these workflows that have a notion that, yes, they're the same thing, right? Maybe the same type name or they're the same workflow name, but they have different versions. But that's part of the issue. The other part is we need to be able to load the correct one at runtime. So workflow service host, right, the piece that works with the workflow services, actually does this for you. It provides you a convention-based mechanism for putting your definitions out there. It'll automatically find the right versions to go with existing instances and use the latest version to start new instances. With workflow application, you have to do this manually. Right? So with workflow application, you have to pretty much do everything manually. But you have to go and load a particular workflow instance. You give it a workflow identity to go along with that, and you have to load the correct workflow definition. So let's take a quick look at that. See if it'll let me clean up that piece that's causing problems. So in our expense service here, the way this works is I've got two different applications pointing at this web service. One's a client for the employee, one's a client for the manager. The employee obviously comes in, they submit an expense report, it kicks off this workflow service, and it's going to start it then, and then get to a point where it's waiting for the second call. It's waiting for the manager to come in and respond. So while it's waiting, its state will be persisted out to the database, as it unloads from memory, and then when we call back, right, workflow through the service host is going to correlate that response back. It's going to load that instance up and let me run it. So let's go ahead and run one of these. We'll set up the employee application as the startup. Oh no. Now it's really going to give me a hard time. Let's go and... Where is it? Unload project. So now it's still complaining about the XAML, but this time it's complaining about the fact that I can't find the file in there. Service contracts, expense service, we'll get rid of that. And that, and that. And we'll hope that does it. Otherwise, this could be a pretty short demo. All right, we'll see if we can get that to build now. Yay, build successful. Okay, good. So now we'll set that startup project again, and we'll run the client application. So this is going to allow me to kick off, and this is going to be using, of course, the version of the workflow that we have here. Suddenly everything slows down. I think it must be looking for Windows updates. So if we look at the workflow properties, well, it's not going to let me expand it while it's in debug, but you can see the definition identity down here. So I've set this up with a name of expense service, and I gave it a version of 1.0. And we'll see that as we come back in and change this. But let's start. So $20 or €20, and we'll submit that. Hope that we haven't totally broken everything here. If it succeeds, we should get back the report ID that matches up. There we go. So 38. I'd ask you to remember that, but then we'd be in trouble if you forgot. So that's 38. That particular instance now is running against this workflow definition of 1.0. And now I want to come in and I want to make some updates. And the way this works is when I make updates and I deploy the new version, any new workflows coming in are going to use that new version. The existing workflows, however, are going to finish up on their original version. So our convention here is under the app code directory. We have a folder named after our service. So it was expenseservice.xamlx. So I'm going to copy that, paste it here. I'll just give that a name like V1. And then we'll come back in here. We're going to change the identity to version 2. And now we could go and add a variety of things in here. Let's do our sequence here. So I'm just going to change this, the email, real quick. Now what you can change is you can change, obviously, the configuration of these activities and add activities in, remove activities. What you can't change is the signature of the service, obviously. And you can't remove the operations, the receive and reply activities that are part of that. All right, so we have that going. Let's run our client again. So 38 is version 1. We'll see what we get for version 2 here. So we'll submit that report. That now should be picking up that new version. If you think about where that new version is, right? It's deployed right where the old XAML file was. So it is now the endpoint that's current for this. Right? So we got number 22 back. And so all new items are going to get routed to that one. Set the manager application here. And what we're looking for is to get some email spitting out here. If we run now our version 1, we should get the version 1 response. We should see in the email, just the regular email. We run version 2, then we should get the version 2 email coming back out. Is it starting? Here I thought I was being smart using a virtual machine so I wouldn't conflict with my other versions. Ah, there it is. Okay. So if we look, our version number 38, we'll approve that one. So this is going to go back now and it will run against the original version. So the workflow service host, the thing that creates that, actually is smart enough to go out and look in this app code directory and see, all right, well, we have the standard one. We've got the one that's currently out there, which is version 2, but I'm also aware of version 1 that's sitting out here. So now we've got an email. Oh, it's going to want to open it with... do that. So we can see your expense report dated today, right, has been approved. Now if we go back, what was our other one here? 22. And we approve that one. In this case we won't approve it, so we'll get a slightly different message. Got a new email back there. You can see then, right, it picked up the changes, we got the V2. So new requests automatically get routed to the latest definition that's out there, but the old definitions now have a home and the service host is aware of them, so that as requests come back in for those second and third and fourth requests, it can load up that old version and use that to handle those requests. All right, let's clean some of this up here. That's a mess. So the last thing I'll show you, just in the interest of time, I'm not going to switch back to the slides right now. Let's go in here, is dynamic update. So dynamic update kind of goes along with workflow versioning. As I said, workflow versioning will allow you to do one thing, right? Existing workflows finish on their original definition. New workflows start on the new definition. What's the middle ground that you might want there in some scenarios? I don't want those old ones to finish on the old version. It was broken. That's why there's a new version, right? I don't want them to go back and finish off on version 1 because it has some problem. I'm not in compliance if they finish on version 1. So dynamic update is a feature, again, that you had in .NET 3. It was available there. They've reintroduced it, redesigned it for .NET 4.5. And what it allows you to do is take a running workflow instance and apply changes to it. So you've started the workflow, it's partway through, it's saved in the database, and you want to be able to go and grab it and apply a set of changes to it. Maybe to make it look like version 2. Right? And so I've got a rehosted designer here, my own simple application. So I'm going to take this workflow, and I'm going to start it executing, and when it gets to the delay, then it's going to persist. So we'll start the workflow. We've got a unique ID for it up here now. And the next step is I'm going to begin the update. So beginning the update means I'm going to take that activity, that workflow definition, and I'm actually going to call begin update, right, or create update for that, because I need to kind of prepare it. And what that does is it creates in that activity that we know not only have the activity, but it takes that original definition and kind of stores it away. So it's prepared the XAML, or the representation of that activity, to have updates applied to it and retain its original information as well. So you can see here we've got this dynamic update, original definition. It has the write line, the delay, the write line in there. And then we have the standard bits of the workflow. So we have all those activities as well. So now we've said we want to begin the update. So I can come in and we'll just add another activity. New activity here. After the fact. And I'm going to end the update. And what that's going to do is create for me this update map. And so the update map is because, well, look, if you've got version 1, right, if you have this original definition that you started with, I took all the updates you applied and I created a map to get you from A to B. Right? So now you have this map that you can go and say, well, I've got all these instances running that match that definition. Now I can go apply this map to them to get them over to my destination to B here. Right? So we ended the update. Now when I hit apply update, what I'm going to do is load that thing up from the persistence store. I'm going to apply the update to it. So I'm going to give it that same update map that you just saw in the file. I'm going to say apply this update, and then I'm going to resume it running. So if we go look at our output, not very exciting output, but the write lines all went out to the to this text file. And so you can see when it finished executing, right, it started with the original definition. It was persisted. I loaded it back up from that persistence store. I applied these changes, which involved adding this new activity, and then I ran it, right, and it continued. So typically what this would look like is a developer would take the definition that's currently out there. They would create the update map and changes and save it to disk like I did. And then you could go out and through a script or through some code, you can walk through persisted workflow instances, apply the changes, and then just unload them right back into the persistent store. Right? So that they have the new updates. When that next WCF call comes in or whatever that next trigger is, they load up and they now have all the changes that you've defined in the map applied to them. Okay. We've got dynamic update. Just a couple other things that are out there. We mentioned the build time validation. The XAML's a little cleaner because all the view state that they store from the designer, instead of sprinkling it throughout, they tack it all in one place. So if you actually want to remove that from the XAML, it's much easier now. And if you're rehosting the designer, there's a couple of extra things that you have control over in terms of hiding, for example, the breadcrumbs and the expand all, collapse all at the top of the designer. And you have a little bit more control there. But again, like the VB expressions, by default, it's backwards compatible. All right, so if you've got your rehosted designer and you start running it on 4 or 5, things should just work. Any of the changes that they made aren't going to get picked up unless you opt in for them. All right. So hopefully that gave you a flavor of the changes coming. Again, some of them highly cosmetic but helpful. Some of them pretty major in terms of the dynamic update coming back. Being able to version your workflows is huge. And the C# expression support. So hopefully that gave you a sense of the changes that are coming. And if you weren't excited about workflow, hopefully you are a little bit now. And I will stick around for questions. I think we're at time, so I will stick around down here if you've got any questions, or feel free to raise your hands and ask now. None. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the show, and have a good afternoon.